The train whistled as it pulled into the small prairie town, steam hissing against the dirt-packed platform. Dust rose in the dry afternoon sun, and the handful of passengers climbed down, clutching carpetbags and looking around with tired or hopeful eyes. Among them was Clara Whitfield, her gloved hands trembling as she adjusted her bonnet. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this town. Not for this marriage. Not for this life. Her sister, Eliza, had been the one promised to the widower rancher out west, a man she had never met but who had written steady, practical letters seeking a wife to help raise his little girl. Eliza had been courted before, her spirit softer, her beauty often remarked upon. But on the night before she was set to leave, Eliza confessed to Clara through tears that her heart already belonged to someone else. Clara had sat by the window, the moonlight pale across her face, weighing the choice. Their family couldn't afford shame. They couldn't afford to send no one. And Eliza, fragile with her secret love, would never survive a life so far away. So Clara packed the trunk. Clara took the train. Clara wore the bonnet. And now Clara stepped onto the platform, her heart heavy with a deception that already felt like sin. On the far side of the platform, Thomas Hale stood waiting. Broad-shouldered, sun-browned, and dressed in plain work clothes, he looked every inch the rancher. But it was not his own appearance that struck Clara first, it was the small girl clinging to his hand. The child couldn't have been more than 6. Pale braids, a dress patched at the sleeves, and eyes far too solemn for her age. She held onto her father's hand as though he were her whole anchor to the world. Thomas lifted his hat, his expression guarded. "Miss Whitfield." Clara swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes." His gaze flicked over her once, not in cruelty but in careful assessment, as though measuring whether she'd fit into the hard life waiting on the ranch. Then, without flourish, he said, "I'm Thomas. And this here's my girl, Annie." The little girl peeked out from behind him. Clara bent slightly, offering a soft smile. "Hello, Annie." The child didn't smile back. She just studied Clara with quiet eyes, then hid her face against her father's leg. Clara's chest tightened. The journey had begun. The ride to the ranch was long and dusty. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap of the wagon, nerves prickling as Thomas guided the horses with practiced hands. He didn't speak much, only asked if she was tired, if she needed water. His voice was steady, deep, not unkind, but there was no warmth in it either. Annie sat close to him, silent. Occasionally she would glance at Clara, as though inspecting this stranger who had come to share their lives. The land stretched out endless, dry plains and rolling hills. Clara had never seen such wide skies. They made her feel small. They made her feel as though her secret, the fact she was standing in her sister's place, could not remain hidden long under such honesty of light. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was dipping toward the horizon. The house stood plain but sturdy, built with care, surrounded by barns and fences. A place made for labor, not luxury. Thomas helped Clara down. "It's not fancy," he said simply. "But it's ours." Clara forced a smile. "It's lovely." Inside, the home was clean but worn. Annie showed Clara to the small bedroom that would now be hers. The girl lingered in the doorway, studying her with those solemn eyes again. Clara knelt to unpack, trying to make her hands steady. "Would you like to help me, Annie?" she asked softly. The girl shook her head, but after a pause, whispered, "Papa said you're going to be my mama now." Clara's throat went dry. She looked at the child, unsure what to say. "I'll try to be whatever you need me to be." The girl stared at her a moment longer, then darted away. Clara sat back on her heels, her heart aching with the weight of what she carried. She wasn't the sister Thomas had written to. She wasn't the mother Annie expected. She was a stand-in, a substitute. Could such a lie ever build a home? Days bled into weeks. Clara rose before dawn, learning the chores, gathering eggs, baking bread, scrubbing floors. Her hands blistered, then toughened. She listened when Thomas spoke of the cattle and the drought, though he never said more than necessary. He was a man accustomed to silence. His grief for his late wife carried not in words but in the long hours of his labor. Annie remained distant at first, watching from corners, her small face wary. But slowly, so slowly, she began to draw nearer. One evening, when Clara hummed an old hymn while mending socks, Annie crept close and laid her head against Clara's arm. Clara froze, then gently shifted, letting the child rest there. Thomas glanced up from his chair, surprise flickering across his face, but he said nothing. Another time, Annie tugged Clara into the kitchen garden, showing her where wildflowers grew among the vegetables. Clara bent low to admire them, making Annie giggle for the first time. The sound struck Clara's heart like sunlight. The bond was growing, despite everything. But Clara's secret haunted her. Each letter Thomas had written, he had meant for Eliza. Each promise of partnership, each plea for help in raising his daughter, had been directed to another woman. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars scatter across the velvet sky, Clara found herself whispering, "Thomas, there's something I must tell you." He turned, his profile outlined against the lantern glow. "Go on." Her hands twisted in her lap. The truth pressed at her lips, but then Annie's small footsteps pattered onto the porch. The girl climbed into Clara's lap, nestling against her as though she had always belonged there. And Annie whispered, soft and certain, "God sent you to us after all." Clara's heart broke wide open. The words silenced her confession. She wrapped her arms around the child, tears slipping unbidden down her cheeks. Thomas watched them, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "Annie doesn't take to strangers easy. If she's chosen you, maybe that's answer enough." Clara swallowed hard, the secret burning inside her. She had come in her sister's place, but in that moment, she wondered if perhaps the child was right. Perhaps God had written a story larger than her shame. Seasons turned. The ranch endured storms, drought, and long days of toil. Clara worked beside Thomas, her strength surprising even herself. Annie grew, laughter returning to her face as she learned to trust, to hope again. There were nights when Clara lay awake, guilt gnawing at her, wondering if she should still confess the truth. But every time, she remembered Annie's words, the child's belief that she was meant to be here. And slowly, Thomas's walls softened. He began to linger by her side, to ask her opinion, to meet her eyes a little longer. One night, after they had put Annie to bed, he said simply, "This house feels different since you came. Lighter." Clara looked at him, her chest tight with both joy and fear. She had come as a substitute. But maybe, just maybe, she had become something more. Years later, when Annie was grown, she would tell the story often, that the day her new mother stepped off the train, she had known, deep in her little heart, that God himself had sent her. And Clara, with tears in her eyes, would finally believe it too.